Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Project CD Chronicles, or welcome. If it's your first time here, let's start with this video. I'll leave the link in the description, but only for the initial part. And look, this apparently looks like a Commodore 64, but it is a Commodore 64. It's the machine that we all know and love. But what if I told you that inside this Commodore 64, this case, inside the heart of this Commodore, there's actually a Linux Debian bookworm? And I'm not talking about emulation. Well, guys, today we're reviewing SYSOP, which isn't just a simple flash cartridge. It's not a traditional accelerator, but it's what happens when an FPGA meets a SYSOP, giving it a lot of additional features designed to transform the Commodore 64 into a more than exceptional machine. Make yourselves comfortable, because in this video we're going to carefully analyze all the features and capabilities of SYSOP 64. We'll go through everything, from the questions and answers to the installation process and all the various features that will help bring this machine back to life together with Linux. Well, let's look at SYSOP in more detail, specifically Bloodmosher's SYSOP 64. I'll also leave the GitHub site, but what is SYSOP then? So it's a cartridge that, as you've seen, is connected at the back, open source for Commodore 64. What does it use inside? A D10 Nano FPGA to add what are modern functionalities to the Commodore 64, and in fact, what is called precisely SYSOP 64, a system operator, that is, it integrates within it nothing less than a complete Linux system, but mind you, based on and therefore on the hardware of the Commodore 64. So it allows, among various features, a video, the output of what is an HDMI video, a control of the DMA engine, and I'll talk to you about this bus in particular because it then allows programming, instant loading of software, and more. Obviously, it must be said that this is still an alpha project. By the way, it's possible to contact Bloodmosher directly to be a beta tester. It is currently being sold anyway, and we can also find the page on the stores. Eventually, if requested, I'll tell you where it is and leave the link. The price obviously is not within everyone's reach, but more than sufficient documentation is referred to here, obviously on the GitHub page, but I'll talk to you about it to give you an overview of this new product. Here are some more screens of the product. What are the main features? Obviously, the output is HDMI. It automatically detects whether it's a PAL or NTSC signal, and of course it has configurable color palettes. And pay attention. What you see here is an overlay of the Linux console directly on the Commodore 64's output. And it works, of course, with all those OLED TVs. It practically eliminates flickering, ghosting, and much more. Well, as for the Linux part, I was telling you it's a Debian 12 bookworm Linux, so it's based on ARM and DEC Nano. You can see it running here, obviously controlled via the terminal shell using a USB-type keyboard. It has a controller that allows SSH and DHCP connections and provides 16 gigabytes of storage via an SD card formatted in FAT32 to load all the various PRG and D64 programs. Of course, there are internal menus. Then to launch demos and so on, it's still in the alpha phase. And obviously, all the advanced binaries are present directly in user local bin to control the Commodore 64 directly. Now, some final technical news for the more daring. We're talking about DMA, we're talking about IRQ, specifically from C64 to Linux for real-time events. We're talking about SID SPI mode to capture the Commodore 64's audio too. Palette synchronization and many other features. Of course, it's still in the alpha phase. Now let's look at some additional features. In the meantime, you've seen here what actual Linux programming is like through Linux, going directly to the Commodore 64 hardware, and printing Hello DMA. Now, while you're still here with me, I'll tell you about the hardest part, which we can also see here, where the getting started section for the board is, and it's a real surgical operation. And it's a part that, let's say, terrifies everyone a bit, which is the signal connection. Because to ensure the cartridge knows what's happening on the C64, we obviously have to intercept the memory bank control. And so obviously, and this is the hardest part, for correct operation, 3 additional wires must be So you have to connect the three provided wires to the pins of the 6510 or 8500. Specifically, he shows you these are the chips to connect: character ROM control, high RAM control, and memory management. Without these connections, obviously the DMA, which then allows the programming you saw, wouldn't know where to write without, of course, crashing the system. Obviously, this is the most complex part. You have to look closely at the diagram, and clearly, guys, don't mess up. Of course, I recommend, and I'll leave the link in the description, that you go and look at the full article in what is in fact the Oasis BSS review, which provides us with a complete overview regarding this board. Obviously, what can we expect and what is inside this board? Naturally, when we open the board's menu, and here are some more hardware parts I'm showing you, but I can't show it all because then, obviously, I'll leave you the link to all these videos to go deeper into the subject. Of course, we're entering what is a real system, in fact, and here you see some more images, a real system that is Debian-like. It's actually a full Debian 12 bookworm, by the way. And here we can manage via DHCP network and set a static IP, specifically then, to go and connect directly with our beloved, at this point Penguin, but our beloved Commodore. What can I say? What to say, obviously. Look at the magic of this simple set color command issued directly from the terminal, which goes directly to interact with our whole 64. But be careful, it's not emulated. It interacts directly via hardware. And look, this is still the result of the demo that he then previously compiled, and that maybe I'll show you an example of later. But at the end of the video, something absolutely exceptional. But how does the magic of all this happen? Could I not bring you, let's say, a block of code that I took directly from the site? 4 instructions, obviously very important. We include what is a shared library, any library that is shared, and what does this little piece of program do? Obviously, in the SYSOP DMA, we have the whole initialization phase because we have a configuration of all the registers. And so here we are in the hardware context to enable what is the DMA memory, which is a memory that the Commodore 64 has called direct memory access. And this is an initial part. Then what do we have to do? Obviously, we have to block this DMA to have what is exclusive access. And so we send what is a 6510 signal to freeze the Commodore 64, because clearly the Commodore 64 has this line that is called DMA, and clearly, so to speak, it must be stopped, because obviously the CPU is using it right now to go and write to it directly, then what's in memory. Obviously, this is the simplest part, nothing more, nothing less. We'll do a poke to the video location and write the ASCII character A, which has code 1, which will be different from PETSI in that location. 0400 hexadecimal 1024 of the usual video memory. Obviously, the end. What do we have to do at the end? Release, obviously, the DMA to allow what is, let's say, a normal execution of what is the Commodore 64. Why is all this necessary, especially the lock and unlock? Obviously, because the Commodore 64 bus is shared, so we obviously can't use it from the Commodore cartridge and so on. Clearly, these are just some small technical details. And then this is a table, obviously a summary where obviously this cartridge goes to improve what are then the features, obviously, of the HDMI. And I've already told you about that. Obviously, the instant loading via DMA and the loading, obviously, as we already know, beyond what was the standard of 170 kilobytes, or we also had those that are the D81 via SD card SD network. Here we had basic and assembly programming, but wait, here we have programming directly in what is Linux with C, Python, Go, and directly more assembler. Obviously, it requires extra hardware, so to speak. The Commodore is obviously not multitasking, even if we can emulate it in a certain way. Here we even have what is the native Ethernet part, and obviously it's multitasking. This cartridge, yes, obviously, because we have Linux that does everything in the background. But obviously the wonders of this cartridge don't end here. I invite you to go and read the article from the Oasis BBS, which is very comprehensive, SID Wizard Superpowers. Why? because the author of this cartridge, Blood Mosher, took SID Wizard on the Commodore 64, and using this cartridge, he added modern features without going to modify the original program, which was this one for the Commodore. Obviously, among the features introduced, and here the article talks about it extensively, we have visualizations even of what are the waveforms, because as the FPGA reads the data directly from the SID and shows what are real-time graphs, while the waveforms, pulse, ADSR, are being changed. And so, in fact, one understands more quickly what they are doing. We even have the MIDI installation on Linux, and we can connect, as you can observe here, what is directly a keyboard MIDI inside what is a SID Wizard. It actually offers many other features as well. And all this is thanks to the SYSOP 64 board. Of course, I'll remind you, it's still in an alpha version. Obviously, one part I found quite useful is the questions and answers. So questions and answers. Main question, as I was saying before, regarding the installation, is there a risk of frying the Commodore 64? Yes, absolutely, if the right pins aren't connected yet, let's say. For the other features, you need a special power supply. Yes, definitely, because the Commodore 64 one, besides not being suitable, then we have the fact that this board also consumes a lot and requires, above all, a modern power supply. Then regarding the various other flash cards, well, they are currently supported, but it's still in an alpha phase as the project is in alpha. So let's say here we can use a technical term, which is the pass-through, which is still in alpha, but it's there. And this, I'm talking about this, there's undoubtedly a roadmap, but it will be expanded in the future. Then, okay, last question. Very, very technical. Can I use the DE10 Nano that I use for the Maester? And I already mentioned it at the beginning. Yes, obviously, but you have to mount it on a specific board and flash the SD card. And this, of course, is for the bravest ones and those who have a heart with a perfect ECG. So, obviously, we have to say that. Through the pros and cons, all that glitters is not gold, as let's not forget it's still an external cartridge, although there's a dedicated menu with Linux and so on, and an SD card that allows you to load 64 PRG programs. But as I was saying, obviously this product is still in the alpha phase, and so what does that mean? Well, the alpha phase means it's often still full of bugs. Of course, I told you before that not all cartridges work correctly, obviously. And maybe most likely, obviously, the hardware installation isn't entirely painless yet. Obviously, what can I tell you? If you want to play Turrican, maybe use a simple Kung Fu flash card. Well, what can I say? SYSOP 64, my final verdict. If I can also say this, obviously, if you're a purist of original hardware and don't want contamination, this will obviously horrify you. But if you're a tinkerer, especially a programmer who loves hardware hacking, this will obviously be for you. Obviously, another point in favor of the SYSOP 64 is that it doesn't replace the Commodore 64, but elevates it from 1982 to 2026 today, and obviously in the future with new features. A point against it, obviously, the price is very high, and therefore the investment must be carefully considered. What can I say? I'll leave you with these last images, which will probably also be the cover image. I'll leave it to you in the comments on the channel, and we'll meet again here on Project CD Chronicles for a next video on our beloved Commodore, Linux, programming, or whatever. Thanks everyone, guys.